Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon. This is Steven Ashurst, Micro-CHP Research Manager. I'm joined with my colleague Kate Lyon.
Hello everyone.
And thanks very much for joining us for this two-part webinar from the Micro-CHP service, where we'll be presenting to you the highlights of both our most recent Micro-CHP market statistics and 2025 forecast report and our most recent in-depth Micro-CHP service report, which focused on the value of Micro-CHP. So we've penciled in an hour for this morning's presentation discussion, given that we have a fair amount to cover. And to begin with, I'll kick off by presenting the latest Micro-CHP market data and Delta's forecast. And if you notice, I've given about 20 minutes or so for the presentation and around 10 minutes or so Q&A, but we'll come on to that in a moment in terms of how you can interact with the webinar. But it would certainly be great to have questions coming at us, as and when they come to you. So we'll look to go 30 minutes in total on the market stats report, and then I'll hand over to Kate, who led a very interesting report into the value Micro-CHP can offer, the additional value Micro-CHP can offer. And and as you see there, the markets we focused on were the UK and Germany. Mm-hmm. So just a very quick reminder, for those of you who haven't been on a webinar with us lately, we'd really like your interaction and your input, and of course your questions. There are a couple of ways you can interact with us. So if you want to ask a question verbally, there's a button on your control panel to raise your hand. So if you'd like to come in at any point, please just do that. We will notice that your hand is raised, and then we can unmute you and allow you to talk. Alternatively, if you prefer to type your question in, you see there's a question box there. So again, just type in your question, fire away, and you can send it privately, or you can choose to send to everybody who's on the webinar as well.
Great.
So if there's no questions right now,
looks like we're okay and everyone can hear us, which is good.
Let's crack on. Okay, so like I said, first of all, I'll begin taking you through the market stats and forecast report. So this report was published about a month or so ago now, so hopefully everyone has had the time to read it. But if not, I'm just going to focus on what I see are the very key, sort of more high level points. Just begin with a brief overview of how the market has evolved over the last year or so. Mm-hmm. Share a couple of highlights as Delta E sees them, important developments that have happened recently, and then take you through our longer term forecast scenarios as we now forecast for Europe out to 2025.
Yeah, and that was a new addition for this year, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, this was the first time we've gone out to 2025. Previously, it's been 2020, but we're almost there already. So,
time to start looking further ahead.
Absolutely. So, our key findings at the time of publication, obviously, the data was only into 2015, and our findings were that after the dip in 2015, we expect the market to very gradually return to growth through 2016 and 2017. So overall, 2015, not relatively, but quite a disappointing year, in the sense that both Europe and rest of the world sales dipped. We had expected a modest dip for Europe that had been forecast in our previous report. However, it was the performance in the rest of the world, Japan, obviously the key market there, which was actually a lot worse than expected, which led to the overall decline in the global Micro-CHP markets. Of course, these are global sales numbers for 5.5 kilowatt and below systems, all technologies. On the left axis there, you can see that's the annual installations. On the right hand axis, that's the associated installed capacity. So 2015 we were at 48,835 units. Like I said, though, we did expect, and based on the preliminary data we've had in, 2016 showed a modest return to growth, around about 11% or so, reaching around 55,000 sales globally, so back up to the pre-2015 levels. And we do expect this kind of slight modest growth trend will be expected through the remainder of this year, 2017, and if that holds true, well, that would actually make 2017 the most successful year for the global micro-CHP market. You can see there in our forecast topping 61,000 units for the first time. Of course, a better and clearer policy environment is central to this outcome, with which is enabling new market entrants to come in. And of course, one of the major developments since our previous market stats report is the initiation of the TEP subsidy in Germany, which is quite a significant subsidy focusing on fuel cells. So we certainly see a strong market push on those technologies there, and equally a return to a more stronger market scenario for the in-farm retailers in Japan also. And these globally combined, we expect these technologies to really drive sales over the short term. You'll see a bit more detail further on in the presentation. Our expectations are that the micro-CHP market will remain predominantly a sub 1 or equal to or sub 1 kilowatt market as well. So still really predominantly focused on single family homes. And I think I've referenced this before as well, but quite striking. You can see in 2015 actually the market was down about a third, and we've discussed the kind of trends about why this is happening before. Policy uncertainty, of course, a major element to this. Also, many fledgling developers, technology suppliers exiting the market. So let's not dwell on that, but you can see the consequent pickup that we expect to be confirmed once the 2016 numbers are in, taking us back to where we were 2 years ago. And the rest of the world, led by Japan, performed slightly less well than was expected. But again, we expect 2016, based on what we've seen so far, will show a return to putting the market on the right trajectory. And just to summarise all that, since 2005, since Delta first started collecting the sales data, an average compound annual growth rate of 12%.
Okay. And how does that compare to some of the other technologies, like low carbon technologies?
Yeah, but I looked at this, and well, for example, hydronic heat pumps, air to water heat pumps, over the same period, that's been about 4 to 5% compound annual growth rate. So
micro-CHP is outperforming air heat pumps at least.
Yeah, it's all relative. Of course, the market for hydronic heat pumps is a lot bigger, but you're right, it's always, that's why we provide figures like that. It's always just quite interesting to benchmark the performance of your sector against other competing low carbon technologies. We looked into things like EVs. Of course, over the last several years, they've exhibited quite a higher compound annual growth rate, but there's different. That's taken into account different markets when you look globally and different specific subsidies targeted at them.
Sure.
So just a little bit more detail. I don't think there's any questions on the overview so far. A little bit more detail looking regionally as we always do. So the main story as we see it now, despite the fact that, as you can see on the top left graph there for European sales, internal combustion engine sales still by a long way lead the market. You can see, for example, 2015 there was about 2,500 internal combustion engine sales versus less than 1,000 of all other types. But certainly what's emerging is a bit more competition between the different types of micro-CHP technologies, especially as you look out towards the end of this year. So that predominantly comes from, as will be, as kind of a key thread throughout this presentation, the the introduction of the fuel cell incentive, the federal fuel cell incentive in Germany, and lots of the manufacturers who are part of the fuel cell initiative there launching and really beginning to have a conservative, not a conservative, but a concerted sales approach to the market. Of course, we still see that Stirling engine is the second best performing technology. We really think now that Stirling will require a strong push in markets outside of Germany, to really hold on to that position. And I'll, later on, when I go down, when I break down our longer term forecasts, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, we mentioned that internal combustion engine is key to sustaining the market in Europe right now, and certainly Cenertech has a continuing a big role to play. Interesting as well, we hear that from talking to Cenertech, they're at the point where they are replacing or upgrading some of the existing early units.
Okay. So
that's a really interesting development in the market here. One thing that you will note is that there is no kind of assault on the market. Assault's the wrong word, but interjection of quite significant organic Rankine cycle product sales. So again, at this time last year, the position of flow was a lot different, and the eagle-eyed among you will notice a small contribution from Rankine cycle in 2016 because there was a low number of tens of units, for example, delivered to market. But those of you who have been keeping up to date with how with that company's approach to market will know that they have since withdrawn from the UK and are now focusing on delivering the remaining units of the current production batch to trials with partners elsewhere in Europe. So certainly for the short term, that's where we see the focus of the key Rankine cycle developer in Europe in flow. So again, please do send through any questions that you have. In the meantime, I'll move on just to the rest of the world. And of course, you can see that the government subsidy remains crucial to the government subsidy for fuel cells. Remains crucial to the market here, and it's quite an interesting trend. You can see from a peak of 20,000 units in 2018, given the fact that there's now little support available for internal combustion engine, residential internal combustion engine, that's down to a couple thousand units in 2016, 2017. Another interesting point, and a key point actually, was the very mixed fortunes of two of the three leading companies in the Japanese NFR market. So a very poor year for Toshiba in 2015, of course, against the backdrop of the issues it's having at the corporate level. Subsequently, you can see that led to very significant growth from the Aisin Osaka Gas SOFC system during 2016. Quite a step change in deployment for them, and we do expect that growth to be accelerated throughout 2017. We've heard already that after the energy market liberalisation, if I can say that, there are a number of Japanese gas suppliers are offering their own feed-in tariff specifically for SOFC, Micro-CHP, and of course the Aisin system is very well placed to benefit from that. And just looking completely globally, the rest of the world, those of you that saw the briefing note that we did on the US just before Christmas, the Gensets program is up and running now, with each of the participants having received their US government funding to accelerate the development of their systems. This is focusing largely on internal combustion engine systems for residential use, but this is still very much at the trial stage. South Korea as well. We see KG Navian leading the way with trial installations of Stirling engine and fuel cell as well. But really, we're still in the position whereby Japan dominates the rest of the world activity. Now, just a quick snapshot here of how the installed base looks per manufacturer, and I really won't spend much time on this. It's probably as subscribers would expect. Just a few points to note. Obviously, with a hiatus from the market in 2015, Solid Power now back selling. I understand that the cumulative deployment now is over 800 units, and obviously they've made progress with establishing sales and distribution deals with a lot of the smaller municipal utilities in Germany, for example, and also looking further afield than that as well. Elcor, again, this data you see here is for the end of 2015. So we have final 2016 data to add to this as and when it comes in, but I understand there's over 500 Elcor units deployed now, which is obviously quite a big jump up from 165.
Yeah, some strong growth.
And certainly a company who's emerged to really be a key driver, a central driver in Micro-CHP in Europe now. Questions over what will happen to the big internal combustion engine product, the 1 kilowatt from Honda, of course still selling at the moment in Japan, and still by a long way the most installed Micro-CHP appliance ever. However, the relatively recent news from Valent that they are withdrawing their offering, including the 1 kilowatt, means Honda will be looking elsewhere to deploy their system in Europe. So just a couple of highlights there. I do apologise for the annotations being very small on the graph, the numbers. Hopefully if you download the file after, they'll be a bit clearer. It was just to fit them on here.
Yep. Yeah, we will be sharing the slides afterwards. Can see somebody's asked a question about that. Yeah, the full recording will be available, and we'll also circulate the slide set as well. So if there's anything you can't quite see on the slides, we will be sending it around afterwards.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. So let's move on to our forecast then, and I have 5 slides I'll go through relatively quickly so we can get on to the detail of the values report. But well, like we referenced at the start of the webinar, the forecast has now been extended out to 2025. It's for all 5.5 kilowatt and below systems in Europe. And well, it's obvious on the slide that our reference scenario now is that by 2025 we expect Micro-CHP will be selling 44,000 units a year in Europe. Central to our view on this is that new product launches will continue to happen with several success stories. We've already mentioned a couple today. It's vital for this scenario is that policy is generally to remain neutral to weak positive across the EU for Micro-CHP. So that's, for example, a feed-in tariff. It doesn't give you a fantastic payback, but nonetheless it's there, and it's support to help raise awareness and just to help the deployment of Micro-CHP, both in your key markets, but also beginning to spread to your more secondary Micro-CHP markets.
Yeah, like France and Italy, for example.
Exactly. Yep. Energy industry engagement we expect will still remain relatively limited to a small committed number of players, but in spite of that, compared to today's market volume, significant growth is still well achievable within that. Installers and customers largely remain difficult to engage with, and new business models will be necessary to open up the market beyond your customers who are installing just now. And again, we're starting to see those come through. The key one being Efficient City, is that okay?
Yeah, Efficient City. Yep. Similar to Thermondo.
Okay. So that's just new ways to sell Micro-CHP online, saving cost, being more direct.
Yeah, no upfront cost as well. A key bit of both models, yeah, that you pay for the unit over time through energy bill savings.
Okay. So that's our reference scenario for 2025. I'll give a moment for any questions, or if anyone wants to raise their hands.
Everyone's being very quiet today.
I will subsequently, after I've presented the overview of the forecast, go into a bit more detail of the technology split, but it won't surprise those of you on the webinar that central to getting this step change in deployment in Europe is the is the advancement of fuel cell technology. And of course, at the moment, and indeed out to 2025, we see that being led by the German market. Again, that'll be clearer when we get to that point. So our reference scenario is the scenario that we have the highest confidence in. That's why we've marked it at the higher probability. There's a lot of analysis, obviously, behind the scenes, technology, payback calculations. Those of in the market stats and the accompanying annual roundup report. There's lots of detail both on current sales, which we base our future view on, and the status of all the key developers in Europe. Now, our low scenario really doesn't merit much time looking at. That's essentially a continuation of the situation in Europe over the sort of 2015, where for several reasons product failures far outnumber the product successes. It's really hard for technology-focused companies to become established. So not the big heating brands, but the smaller companies, for example, your Pro Embassies, your Kirsches, which is, like I said, what we've seen over the past few years. In this scenario, policy push weakens even further across Europe in general. Because of this, the energy and heating industries shy away from Micro-CHP and generally other low carbon technologies. Customers and installers remain very conservative and uninterested. Our high scenario. Well, under our high scenario, we see about 156,000 Micro-CHP systems being installed across Europe in 2025. We do think this could be achievable. It's lower probability, hence why it's our higher scenario. But central to this being achieved will be a wave of new products hitting the market, not just fuel cell, but products that are very precisely configured for the market's applications they are targeted for. For example, add-on engine Micro-CHP, lower cost, easier to fit in markets outside Germany, where you can perhaps install the unit in the outside of the property, connect to the existing heating system. We're not seeing those emerge as fast as would be required right now, but that will be key in reaching this higher figure. Strong, stable, and specific supportive policy required here, and good spark spreads prevail. So I don't know if I mentioned the spark spreads point for the reference scenario, but spark spreads still remain pretty good in Europe. And in the high scenario, they don't just stay there, but they increase perhaps even further. So a spark spread of 3.5 to 4, let's say, is our assumption here in the main heating markets. And given this leads the energy industry and other players to play more actively in the home energy market, realising the wider range of values that Micro-CHP can unlock. So this is becoming an increasingly relevant and interesting topic. The reason we've written a report on it that Kate's going to explain in a moment is because it was the highest priority among subscribers. And again, tapping into not just the fact that Micro-CHP allows the end user to feel good, to do something green, to save a bit of their own carbon emissions, but really being able to help when the Micro-CHP industry is really able to help the grid transition to a more low carbon economy. That's what we're talking about here. And of course, with a growing market, installers and customers become increasingly interested. New business models don't just start to emerge, but take off. Again, along the lines of what we've mentioned, no capex or very low capex energy services, and strong sales bases are established following the cementing of a strong German market. Manufacturers increasingly look to expand outwards: UK, Benelux, France, Italy, even further east in Europe. Now that was just a very high level overview given the time here, but a lot more detail on each of our 3 scenarios is available in the market stats and forecast report on the website. And we're always looking for questions, challenge even on these. So if you do have a time to read after the webinar and any questions remain, please just get in touch with us. Okay, we're just seeing a question coming through here about spark spreads.
So we've got a question here about whether we take into account the carbon savings and whether as the electricity grid decarbonises and you get less carbon saving from the micro-CHP, does that have an impact on the modelling, or did we base it just on the financial modelling, so financial spark spreads? That's a good question.
Yes, it's a fair comment. In the time window we're looking to, we expect largely micro-CHP will remain lower carbon, say, than the carbon intensity of most grids, at least the major grids in Europe. So at this point in time, our analysis is predominantly based on the financial element to micro-CHP propositions, but increasingly so we think this will be need to be taken into account to a greater degree. And this question's from the UK, and looking at the UK specifically, we feel that moving beyond, as new incentives and regulations are updated from 2020 and beyond, we think there will be a much more central focus on carbon savings, other than, for example, the way the current feed-in tariff is set up, which is really just purely on economics.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the carbon intensity often it matters a lot to policymakers, and when you're talking to policymakers about micro-CHP, I suppose the sales forecasts they're often thinking more about what the end customer is going to be looking at, and end customers generally are looking. Some will be looking to reduce their carbon footprint, but a lot of them are looking at sort of the financials, aren't they? And what does it mean for my household bills? What's it going to do to my wage packet at the end of the month?
Yeah, and especially in the commercial sector as well. It's, the decision is, can I achieve ideally, well, certainly below a 5, ideally below a 4-year payback.
Okay, yeah.
So getting out to 2025, that's where we still see the key decision being made by the end user. We've got a question about the split in terms of technologies, so that leads on nicely actually for the remaining time I've got. I'll take you through that. So I have just two slides left. I mentioned at the start of the broadcast, out of our 44,000 micro-CHP installations total in Europe in 2025, the market will be largely focused on the I said the sub 1 kilowatt range, and that's right. Here, this is just this is a representation of our estimations for 2 kilowatts and below. And you can see here that's we achieve an annual market volume of 40,000 units in 2025.
So that's the vast majority of sales by 2025, isn't it?
That's the vast majority. That's 90% or so of the sales, and you can see annotated on the chart as well. We do expect at the moment, under current conditions, that over 90% of these installations will be in Germany. And I can just show you the charts on the bottom of the page. This is where we were at in 2015 in terms of the technology mix in the sub 2 kilowatt market in Europe. So almost half. Still coming from Stirling engine, of course the range of mech products, mainly sold in Germany, a little bit in the Netherlands and other markets close by. SOFC coming from manufacturers like Solid Power, predominantly at this point in time, but also an insurgence from PEM. So Viessmann having been selling their PEM with Panasonic from 2014. Elcor starting to grow sales, as we pointed out on the other page. This is how we expect it to have changed by 2020, where we're at about 17,000 units or so. And as I said before, it won't come as a surprise to you that given the significant subsidy in Germany, which gives €9,000 plus or minus, depending on if you're just over or just under 1 kilowatt. We expect a strong push in getting stronger from this year on, which leads a number of fuel cell developers, part of the IBZ, to really start to grow their sales base. As a consequence, internal combustion engine, you can see there in the sub 2 kilowatt segment, we see facing some strong competition, and really the trend continuing out to 2025. Again, this is a reference scenario. So in our other scenarios, there's a stronger competition from technologies like Stirling engine, like ICE. But given that Germany seems to have not all of a sudden, but it's been coming for a while, but now the focus is largely on fuel cell micro-CHP. This is how we expect the market to develop. Just one point, sorry, before I go on as well, just to put our forecast in the context of the wider industry. I think the target in Germany is for, I think, 70,000 fuel cell micro-CHP units deployed in 2020. So you can see delta, we actually expect the market volumes to be a long way below this. There has since been some key manufacturers who have said that for now they'll withdraw their fuel cell products, Valent obviously being the key one, as was announced at ISH. So still taking a very bottom-up, not conservative, but realistic view of how the market will evolve based on the information that we have in the service. And I know it's a meeting into your time now, Kate, so this is my final slide. Over 2 kilowatts, a 5.5 kilowatts, so essentially the small commercial market for micro-CHP. Our view is for, under the reference scenario, not too much change from now. You really need us to enter into the high scenario for a step change in deployment. At the moment you have 100% internal combustion engine technologies. Slowly by 2020 there's the emergence of Stirling engine, for example, a couple of products using the Qnergy Stirling engine.
Okay.
And again, by 2025 we expect a wider range of technologies to be not necessarily established, but have a share in the market. For example, your microturbine technology, RBZ, sorry, with the PEM, and of course growing sales of Stirling engine. So that was, I appreciate that was a bit of a quicker overview than the sub 2 kilowatt market, but I think it's important that we get onto the value of micro-CHP report now. There's lots of interesting content that we want to bring you up to speed with. So I'll pass over to Kate. Any questions on the forecasts, just keep them coming in, and if we don't have time today we can respond offline afterwards.
Sure.
And equally, as questions about the values report come up, please just raise your hand or type the question in the box and we'll address them throughout the presentation.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Stephen. So moving on now to the other report that we've published recently under the Micro-CHP service, which again I hope you've all had a chance to read. It's been out for a few weeks now. Is the value of Micro-CHP. And clearly when we talk about value, and when we were scoping out the report, it became clear there's a number of different benefits that you could be talking about with Micro-CHP when you say value. And these range from the customer soft factors, so feeling reassured, or that you've got energy security, or that you're independent from your electricity supplier and you can generate your own electricity, through to the values that are more clearly financial values. So the energy bill savings that can be made, or the incentives and subsidies that Micro-CHP unit can earn. And as well, you've also got to think about when these benefits can be accessed. So which of these are available today to Micro-CHP and which might only become accessible at some point in the future. So for example, if we just focus on some of the easily monetized or financial benefits, Micro-CHP today can make energy bill savings for a customer and can earn money from various incentives and subsidies that are available. In terms of network benefits, we do know that there's constraints around the electricity network, and some of the distribution network operators are bearing a cost of having to sort of reinforce the networks, and Micro-CHP could help to alleviate these. But at the moment there's kind of no clear financial framework or clear way that Micro-CHP can be rewarded for providing that service. So we do know that it's a financial benefit, but it's not something that you could get at the moment. So based on the conversations and feedback that we had with a number of the subscribers when we were getting started with this report, we narrowed this big scope of values down to 2 that we were going to look at in particular. And these are financial values and they are accessible today. and we decided to focus on Micro-CHP selling electricity into the capacity market or into the ancillary services market, and I'll go on and explain what those are in just a moment. So yes, in terms of value, we decided to, for this report, and there is scope to look at other values further on in other reports if subscribers are interested, but for this particular report, we decided to look at benefits that can be easily monetized, so they're financial savings or financial payments, and that you can access today. And we chose for this report just to focus on two markets to start with, Germany and the UK. So why Germany? Well, as you've seen from the market stats and forecasts that Steven's just presented, and as you're probably all aware of already, it's the largest market at the moment for Micro-CHP currently. It's still very reliant on government support in order to make the units economically attractive. So if there's a way for units to get additional value, this could help to further support the case for the unit, make it more financially attractive to customers, and also to help it move away from a situation where it's so reliant on government subsidies, which, as we all know, can sometimes be here today and gone tomorrow. It's always best not to bank on those too much. And also, Germany has been one of the European countries moving fastest towards having a lot of renewable electricity on its electricity grid and network. So there should, in theory, be high demand for grid balancing services. And then in terms of the UK, well, the UK is actually one of the best developed markets in Europe in terms of access to ancillary services for demand-side loads, so small loads at the end of the electricity network, like Micro-CHP, which isn't the case in Germany, as we're going to see. It's also still quite a good second market for Micro-CHP after Germany, although we've yet to see any sort of real sales progress there, unfortunately. It's still got a high penetration of gas connection to buildings for heat. It's still quite reasonable domestic wealth. We'll see how Brexit pans out with that one, but for now we're all right. And there's reasonable spark spreads. And finally, the current government support mechanism for Micro-CHP, the feed-in tariff, is due to end in March 2019. So given that that's approaching, it's good to be thinking ahead and looking at where additional revenue could come from that can help to make the case for Micro-CHP once the feed-in tariff is no longer available. Before we go any further, I think it would be helpful just to explain some of these terms and what we mean by them. Certainly one of the things that I found while I was doing this research, there's a lot of new terminology to get to grips with, so we thought it would be helpful to explain those to you. The first one you'll see a lot is capacity market. That's a mechanism whereby you can receive payment for making sure there's additional electrical capacity available to make sure that total electricity provision to the grid can meet total demand at peak times of the year, such as in winter. And you can do this either using a generation asset, so a Micro-CHP, a distributed level or big centralized generation, or by controlling demand, so turning people's electricity use up and down. The UK does have a capacity market. It was introduced in 2014 to alleviate concerns about whether we had enough generation capacity in the UK to meet peak winter demand. And it's really a mechanism designed to ensure enough sort of long-term investment in generation capacity. Germany doesn't have a capacity market currently, although they discussed one in 2014 to 2015 as to whether they needed one. They decided they didn't in the end because Germany's just that bit more heavily linked to other countries with its sort of central position in Europe and better interconnection. So the second one is ancillary services. Ancillary services, they're sometimes known as balancing services, or it's not technically right, but it's basically about making sure the electricity grid does stay in balance with enough supply onto the grid matching demand. And that can be both in terms of making sure there's just enough electricity to meet needs, but also to make sure that the correct frequency is maintained on the electricity network. So yeah, again, this can be done either through increasing or decreasing generation or changing consumption at the site. So yeah, we've gone with the term ancillary services. Like I say, it's sometimes used interchangeably with balancing services, but that's probably best not to use because you can get that confused then with the balancing that utilities have to do in terms of making sure they've purchased enough electricity in sort of the day ahead markets to meet demand. So it's best just to stick with ancillary. And in Germany, the various ancillary services are known as the control reserve market. So final definition that I just want to run by you before we move on to sort of the real meat of the presentation is transmission system operator, or TSO. You'll see this one a bit. So the transmission system operator is the body or bodies in any country that are responsible for making sure the grid operates in a stable and secure manner. And they're particularly looking at the electricity transmission network, which is the long-distance high-voltage network that carries electricity from where it's produced to the places where it needs to go into the distribution network to be distributed. So the final bit of the journey is looked after by the DNOs or DSOs, which are the distribution network operators. But in terms of capacity market and ancillary services, that's looked after by the TSO or the transmission system operator. So hope you've all found that educational.
I did.
Good. And moving on then in terms of what we found out about the markets in the different countries. So in the UK, there's only one TSO, which is National Grid. There's quite a large range of services that you can apply to provide to National Grid and be rewarded for. As I've said, the UK does have a capacity market. It also has quite an extensive ancillary services market. So there are 22 different services at the moment, which National Grid procures generation or demand side response for. And those are split into frequency response services and reserve services. So frequency response are those where the provider has to react very quickly within a very short time frame, and that helps to maintain the frequency on the network. And reserve services are a little bit more like the capacity network in that providers helping to make sure there's enough electricity available to meet total demand. Good news is there's a simplification process going on at the moment. Hopefully quite soon, providers will be able to bid either just to provide pre-fault or post-fault grid balancing, which is hopefully going to make it a bit easier for additional aggregators and people to come into the market and provide these services. You're not going to have to choose from 26. You bid into whichever of these is most appropriate. And the other good news in the UK is that aggregated demand-side loads like Micro-CHP in many buildings are accepted into many of the services. In practice, unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of them, there are some people who are doing aggregation, and aggregated loads are often losing out in the bidding process just because the big central generators are able to bid at lower prices. Okay. But in theory, the market is open, which is good news. And yeah, in terms of, I mentioned there are some people who are doing aggregation in the UK market. It's still relatively immature market, but there's growing interest. And there's definitely growing interest in sort of the residential or demand side loads. So on the left here, we've got a couple of examples of dedicated aggregators who are specifically starting out looking at small loads. Mm-hmm. So VCharge, who are a case study in the report, who are doing frequency response using electric storage heaters. And Upside, or another company who are looking to become established, they are looking to aggregate different diverse small loads, again, to access ancillary services. There's also a number of better established larger players. These guys on the right-hand side, like Restore, Flexitricity, etc. They're starting out with sort of larger commercial and industrial loads. So each load that they aggregate is probably a couple of 100 kilowatts plus. Mm-hmm. But they could potentially move into smaller loads once they become better established. And then moving on to Germany. Germany, slightly more complicated picture. There are 4 TSOs in Germany, and they each look after a different geographical area. They do typically work together to procure the services that they need. So there is only one control reserve market, and all 4 of them get the capacity or the frequency response they need within those. But unfortunately, if you're going to apply, you do need to go pre-qualify with each of them. So that's a bit more of an onerous burden. There's a slightly more simple ancillary services market than in the UK. There are only 3 services you can bid into: the primary, secondary and tertiary control reserve, which together make up the control reserve market. Primary control is a bit like frequency response in the UK. You have to respond very quickly, so within 30 seconds, to help balance out frequency on the electricity grid. Secondary has a slightly longer response time, so up to 5 minutes, and it both provides a bit of frequency control and makes sure there's enough generation. And the tertiary is it's longer response time. You've got up to 15 minutes to provide capacity when you're called on, and it's for longer system imbalances or more planned system imbalances. Yeah, like I say, accessing all of these requires pre-qualification, which can be a slightly onerous process. The easiest way to access any of these would actually be to partner with a provider who's already pre-qualified, and in Germany, realistically, that's probably one of the big utilities because they already, feed into this market. And discussions we've had suggest that, unfortunately, at the moment, getting into the tertiary control reserve, it'd be very, very difficult to pre-qualify a group of an aggregated group of small assets like a Micro-CHP. So unfortunately, although that's kind of the best one in terms of response time, you've got up to 15 minutes to provide. It's going to be quite hard to access. So in terms of the aggregation market, again, we think it's sort of best classed as immature, but with some growing interest. There's a number of players who are already commercially operating virtual power plants, not necessarily just of Micro-CHP, often of a lot of different kind of assets together. And notably, these are kind of bigger players than the UK. The UK market seems to be, at the moment, it's mostly dedicated aggregators who are coming into this space. In Germany, it's often some of the larger companies, the utilities like EWE and Vattenfall. And the other thing to note is that when you look into the business model of some of these aggregators or some of the utilities, which again we do in the report, we've got case studies on Next Kraftwerke and EWE for people to read. We find they're often gaining revenue not only on the control reserve market through the ancillary services, but also through trading electricity on the electricity markets like the EEX. So having looked at the markets, we then went on to do some sort of initial high-level modelling on these services to get a feel for how much revenue you might be able to earn per Micro-CHP unit, to see what difference accessing these markets could make to the Micro-CHP proposition for customers. So in terms of determining how well Micro-CHP will be able to play in these markets and access revenue, you've got a couple of different things that count. First one of these is the heat-power ratio of the unit, and that's tied closely as well to the amount of thermal storage that's going to be available. So these two things together are going to interact to determine how many hours you can run for when called upon for these services. And how many, kind of in terms of how long we thought each of the units would be able to run for, we did sort of, the limit you're ultimately going to run up against is the thermal demand of the property. Okay. So both in terms of space heating and hot water heating, unless you're going to start dumping heat, which you don't really want to do. It doesn't make a good case for Micro-CHP. And then you've got the response time, so how quickly the units can begin generating electricity when they're called upon. And the other consideration that you need to think about is how often, how likely is the units already to be running. If a unit's already generating at full capacity, at times when there's high electricity demand from the grid, there's no point switching to exporting the electricity, and the electricity is better being used in the house. So you've got to think about when the unit's likely to be available. And as well, in terms of typical generation, we did all these calculations kind of in a to sort of simplify the calculations. We assumed a 1 kilowatt unit, but for some of the fuel cell technologies in particular, the unit's often running anyway, either modulated down or modulated down basically when it's not generating at full capacity. So to provide a full kilowatt, you might need more than one kilowatt fuel cell Micro-CHP, if that makes sense.
So just to summarise at the moment, then Kate, if you look at the range of technologies on the left and the response time, linking that back to the services available, most of the technologies here are in the several minutes mark. So that would perhaps rule out things like frequency response, or fast frequency response. Sorry, unless of course there's things like a battery, for example, which I know you're going to come on to. Yeah. But in principle, the range of Micro-CHP technologies covered very, very, very able to participate in these services markets. Yeah, certainly the longer markets. You make a good point there about the frequency one, and yeah, that's something we'll come on to. That typically frequency response, it rewards quite well, but you do need very fast response times. So yeah, you will be looking at potentially pairing a battery with a Micro-CHP in order to access those. But yeah, like you say, we'll come on to those in a moment. So, and yeah, it's just worth saying we realised we've got a range of subscribers, range of different technologies among the subscriber base that we have, and also some subscribers who are interested in kind of looking across multiple technologies. So this one we did sort of try to look at the particulars for each particular technology to see how well it fitted. Right, we do just have a question. I'm just going to pause here and see what this says.
Okay, yeah, so someone's just asking about SOFC and the fact that it's kind of got quite a low likelihood to respond in the table. Yeah, this was to do with the point that I was making a moment ago about when the technology is already running. So typically with an SOFC, it's typically going to be set to be generating most of the time. We know the technology can modulate up and down, but generally they're already generating at quite a high level, quite a lot of the. If you had a 1 kilowatt unit, it would probably be generating electricity quite a lot of that 1 kilowatt, maybe 0.8, for a good chunk of the year, and it's very likely to be turned off. So if there's demand for additional electricity on the network, the SOFC doesn't have a lot of extra capacity to ramp up and respond to that, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, no, please do send through additional questions as they occur to you. We'll try and, I realise we're getting a little tight on time, but we'll try and squeeze a few in at the end. There we go. Yep. So moving on then to looking at the payments that you can get within the UK. We left aside the energy cost savings in these calculations. We're just looking purely at the revenue you could get from the capacity market and the ancillary services. Values in the UK, the maximum you're likely to be able to get is probably around the £130 a year mark. And we don't see a lot of potential for these values to increase over time. National Grid does have a competitive procurement process for these services. So there's always going to be competition from other technologies, and National Grid are keen to try and keep costs down as much as possible for UK PLC. So it's not, unfortunately, we don't see a lot of potential for these to increase in the near future.
And that's in spite of the simplification, moving from 26 or so services to a lot fewer.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm afraid so. It's more to do with how fast you can respond and things like that. Yes. So in terms of the capacity market, then capacity market requires a unit to run for up to 4 hours at a time. So although in theory this market is worth about sort of £20 per kilowatt electricity per year, it's only kind of the fuel cell technologies that are likely to be able to run for up to 4 hours without maxing out their thermal storage if they're called upon. The other units, the more heat-led units, you're likely to, if you wanted to respond to this market for up to 4 hours, you're going to need more than one unit. You're going to need a lot more than one unit in the case of sort of the engine technologies. So that's why the payment per engine technology is much lower here. You're going to have to split it between several different units, even to get to a kilowatt. In terms of the ancillary services, then we looked at 3 examples. We did one reserve service, the short-term operating reserve, and then we looked at 2 frequency response services. So firm frequency response static, which means you're only called upon if there's a problem, and firm frequency response dynamic, which is where the unit is, for all the time that it says it's available, it's plugged into the electricity grid and it's modulating and responding in order to dynamically meet any of the frequency changes. So the reserve services, you're paid on the hours that you say you're available for, and then you also get an additional payment if you're called upon. The frequency response services are a little bit different because it's not known how frequently or how often, I should say, it's so confusing, how often you're going to be called upon. You actually just bid in terms of windows of availability. So you say how many hours a day you're available for. And because it's based on availability, then again, this is a service where the engine technologies might actually be better placed to respond because there are more hours throughout the year when the unit won't already be running, but there could be potential for the unit to run a bit more, generate some electricity, put that heat into some sort of thermal store or hot water tank. The fuel cells, on the other hand, are likely already to be running to some level, so it's less likely they're going to be able to respond when called upon. So the frequency response services more valuable, and in this case, it's actually the engine technology is going to be slightly better placed to access these potentially. So if you look at the amount that you can get then compared to some of the traditional revenue streams from Micro-CHP, the feed-in tariff, which, like I say, is currently available, is a reasonably generous level of support actually in comparison to these values. The other traditional value that it normally gets looked at is the self-consumption. Frequency response service is actually starting to look pretty good compared to an additional 10% self-consumption.
Mm-hmm.
However, as Steven's mentioned, the issue with the frequency response services is going to be the response times that you need to meet. So to access the most valuable services, you need to respond within 2 seconds to get the most valuable stream, which is the dynamic FFR. So you are going to have to look at combining with some kind of battery storage technology in order to be able to put the electricity onto the grid quickly enough. We didn't do a full sort of detailed analysis of the proposition of adding a battery to the Micro-CHP. If we did, I don't think you'd have the full report by now, to be honest. But we did do some sort of high-level figures. Adding a 1 kilowatt-hour battery, which is probably the minimum that you'd need, is probably going to add between sort of £1,200 and £1,500 for that battery. So if you take the maximum revenue you could earn, £130, that's going to take about 9 years to pay back, which is already stretching it a little bit, I suppose, in terms of what customers find acceptable. And that's not yet helping to pay back the cost of the Micro-CHP. If you did add a battery, you'd be able to increase self-consumption a bit. Again, we didn't look at this in detail in terms of how much additional you could get, but assuming sort of a rough figure of 200 to 500 extra kilowatt hours a year used on-site by having the battery and getting more additional self-consumption, that helps the payback a bit, but you're still looking at quite a number of years. So moving on to Germany. So Germany, the additional value is likely to be a bit less. It's likely to be around €70 a year. As I mentioned earlier, tertiary control reserve, it's probably unlikely Micro-CHP will be able to get onto that one, so we'll just skip that one. The values are quite low anyway. The next two are the secondary control reserve and the primary control reserve. Secondary is the value for providing secondary control reserve is actually quite high per kilowatt, but the issue with this particular service is you need to be able to provide for up to 12 hours if you're called upon. The minimum window or the minimum availability you have to stay is 12 hours, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you might have to run for all of that if you're called on. Otherwise you face some stiff penalties. So unfortunately, given that's a long run time, most Micro-CHP is going to max out its thermal storage within that time. So unfortunately, the value on that service is going to be quite low per unit. Primary control reserve then, which is a bit like frequency response in the UK, that's going to be the most attractive ancillary service in Germany in terms of revenue. And the other good thing about this one is that you only have to respond for up to a quarter of an hour. So that's very helpful for the high heat to power technologies.
And the response time for that one, Kate?
Yep, we'll come on to that one. That is also fast, unfortunately. Yep. So again, that's 30 seconds to come on with that one. So probably with the ability of any of the Micro-CHP units to respond on their own. So again, we're going to be looking at needing a battery. So the battery economics in Germany are a little bit worse than in the UK, just because the maximum amount you can earn through the ancillary services is lower, but costs are quite similar. That said, we have seen this is actually a bit of a trend we're seeing emerging in Germany already, is adding a battery onto a Micro-CHP. It's being done by Senatec at the moment. You can, if you go in to buy one of the Senatec Micro-CHP units of any of the sizes or technologies, actually, you can be offered a battery, primarily probably by Varto, one of their main partners, but potentially other battery technology manufacturers as well. And we also saw this example. Steven, you took this photo, didn't you, at ISH?
Yeah, pleased with it.
Yeah, it's a good photo. So that was, again, from the same family, from the BD Arthur Meyer family, but this is the Brottier EcoGen 1 kilowatt Stirling engine, partnered up with, I think it was 8 kilowatt hours worth of battery.
Around about 8 kilowatt hours, yeah. Again, not just in the BDR range, but that was one of the key trends, certainly at the ISH fair this year, was the combination of 6 to 8 kilowatt hours worth of battery storage with a Micro-CHP. So we saw also with the Visa and Vito Valor, with the BDR fuel cell range as well.
Yep, that's a good point. We've got a question, so we're just going to pause and have a quick nosy. Ooh, okay. What are the questions we've got here? Yep. Sorry, we're struggling to get the questions pulled up. Something a bit wrong with the technology. Yes, we've got a question. Yeah, we've got a fair point about home battery storage and whether we think that market's going to grow outside of the micro-CHP industry. So I think this is around, do we expect to see homes adding a battery just either to maximise self-consumption from PV or to store energy? I think that's probably a reasonable expectation. Batteries are a bit trendy and a bit sexy at the moment, especially with sort of the Tesla Powerwall coming out, and also with people who've installed PV and would like to increase self-consumption of the electricity that their PV unit generates. PV typically obviously generating when a lot of people aren't at home, so that's something that appeals to people. There's already a bit of a trend for that in Germany in terms of people adding a battery to a PV array they've got or going out to buy PV plus battery. And once that market's grown a bit and costs come down, I think we're definitely going to see something similar happening in the UK. Cool. Okay, so cracking on, because I appreciate we're getting almost over time now. If anyone else has put questions in, we'll come back to you and answer you afterwards. Yeah, so in summary then, unfortunately these values aren't really going to make a big improvement to the case for an individual micro-CHP in the UK or in Germany, and we don't see that changing particularly in the near future. The other challenge here that we didn't really mention was that you are going to have to aggregate into large fleets if you want to access these services. Most of the services are sort of between 1 megawatt and up to 5 megawatts combined capacity that you need to have together. And adding a battery is going to be necessary to access the most valuable services, but unfortunately the economics of that don't stack up particularly well at the moment. So it's possibly not worth doing. The positive side of the battery, however, might be, as we've seen already various people doing, is to sort of help increase the appeal of technology in terms of people being able to self-consume more of the electricity they generate, and touch on some of these customer soft factors that we mentioned right back at the start about having sort of increased independence and self-reliance in terms of your electricity supply. Cool.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good, clear summary there, Kate. Let's. I see there's no additional question that's coming there just now, but if they do, just keep typing or send them to either Kate or myself offline. Our final slide here is just a reminder. We looked at two currently monetizable values for micro-CHP. There is a vast range of values that micro-CHP can potentially access and benefit from to a larger degree in the future than is doing at the moment. That could be quite specific technology related things, for example strict building codes that relate to the level of NOx and SOx emissions, or it could be to maximise the trend that we see that ties in with battery storage, just the move towards customers seeking a higher degree of energy independence and security, or of course any number of the other ones mentioned on the screen there, maintenance contracts, using the energy services model more, which we certainly think there's larger potential to do so. Before we finish up for the day, I just wanted to very briefly remind all subscribers about our annual summit. So we're now just about seven weeks away now. Hopefully you've all received an initial notification or a couple of initial notifications, invitations from us about this. This year we'll be holding the summit again in Edinburgh on the 7th and 8th of June. And what we've done this time is expanded the Micro-CHP Summit. So this year we will be looking at low carbon heat, whole low carbon heat in general. And we've got what we think is a really interesting and exciting programme. I'll just scroll down to show you some of the speakers lined up confirmed to talk already, include the Scottish Government, Group Atlantic, E.ON, well you can see them all there.
Delta Energy and Environment, most important.
Of course. the big manufacturers, network companies, and of course new entrants who have been quite disruptive in the sector, such as Thermondo. With regards to the format of the summit, it remains a 2-day event with the roundtable on the first day and the full summit programme on the second day. The summit for Micro-CHP subscribers will focus on largely Micro-CHP, but also the influence of other low carbon gas technologies in achieving Europe's decarbonisation goals. This will be run at the same time as a summit looking at the role heat pumps can play in that. Our colleagues from the Heat Pump Research Service will be looking at that. We'll have a really nice networking dinner afterwards at the Hub, which is a really cool, I don't know if it's quite Gothic, but
Gothic's quite a good word
Gothic
for it,
style building in the middle of the Royal Mile.
Yeah, about 2 doors down from the castle if anyone wants to come see the castle.
And the following day will be the full summit programme. At the moment we have the 4 sessions lined up, looking at how policy interventions will drive market change. We'll follow that with a more specific look at how technology developments are driving fragmentation in the heating market. New products, new combinations of products, new sort of operating patterns for products. So you can see we have a range of manufacturers and developers on the bill there. Then we'll look at, draw on some of our own customer research, as well as discuss with installers and other players, looking at from a more a customer angle, and conclude with a view on how the growing range of new business models that we're seeing come online can how they're affecting the sector and how they'll continue to disrupt the market. And obviously there will be a perspective on how they can accelerate the deployment of Micro-CHP as well. So for the roundtable and the summit, all subscribers still receive 1 free place per company based on your subscription to the service. So if you want to come, you can. I think if you want to scroll down, Kate, I think there is an option on this page of the website. We'll include this link when we post the webinar slides online later today. So you can see the big button there, or equally you can just let us know if you plan on attending. And yeah, we'd love to see subscribers start to fill the places up. It'll still be an intimate event. We really want to keep the quality of the networking and the discussion as high as it has been previously in our Micro-CHP summits.
Yep.
And yeah, we look forward to having you all back on our home turf this June. So if you want a nice distraction from the UK election,
well, I know we will.
make sure you have your place booked at the summit.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we think as well with sort of widening it out this year from Micro-CHP to the wider heating industry, it would be a good opportunity for subscribers to come and learn about the other changes that are happening in the industry. What's the competition up to? How does Micro-CHP fit within the whole field of gas using heat?
That's right. It was feedback, now you mention it, Kate, the way that we have had for the past several years, just looking at Micro-CHP within the context of other technologies. So again, we really hope that's going to add something new, a new perspective, allow our subscribers to speak to your contemporaries working in other technology areas. Gas heat pumps, for example, would be a key one, and hear from key players in the market, such as your big OEMs, such as your policy makers, who are really going to be influential in driving the change in the decarbonisation in the European heating market.
Yeah.
So thanks finally for your attention today, for your questions. There's some that we've got to follow up with offline. We'll certainly do that. And on this topic or anything related to the Micro-CHP service, please keep the questions coming in. There will be more notifications from Kate and myself about the upcoming deliverables in the Micro-CHP service shortly. And we wish you a good rest of the day.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.